The apartment was silent except for the steady drip of water from the tub. A woman lay motionless, her silk robe twisted around her legs, the afternoon light glinting off porcelain. Detectives paused. There were no signs of struggle, no theft, nothing out of place. Yet on the bathroom floor, a single horsehair waited to tell them everything they didn't yet know. The year was 1936. In a graceful Beekman Place apartment high above the East River, Nancy Violet Evans Titterton lived a life that seemed poised for brilliance. At 34, she was an aspiring novelist and respected book editor, married to Lewis Henry Titterton, a leading executive at NBC. Nancy had already published short stories and earned recognition in literary circles. She and her husband had made Manhattan their home, cultured, modern, tightly woven into New York's intellectual and social world. That afternoon, everything changed. Nancy's life lay shattered in that very home she had built and curated. The neighborhood, the era, her status, all would be scrutinized in the hunt for answers. In a time before fingerprint databases or modern DNA, investigators knew forensic breakthroughs were rare, yet a single fiber, a lone hair, might prove decisive. In an age before DNA, before modern forensics, even a single piece of fiber could make or break an investigation. The morning of April 10, 1936, began like any other for Lewis Titterton. At exactly 9 a.m. he slipped into his coat, kissed his wife goodbye, and departed for his radio executive duties across Manhattan. Nancy remained behind, alone in their elegant Beekman Place apartment, awaiting a routine upholstery delivery. She had arranged for 2 men from the local upholstery shop to install recovered cushions and draperies that morning. Shortly after the delivery call, Theodore Kruger and John Fiorenza, repairmen from the upholstery business, arrived. They ascended to Nancy's apartment, knocked, and heard no answer. Expecting a response, they proceeded inside, noting the door was already unusual for the Titterton household. Midday passed uneventfully until Mrs. Ray, a neighbor several doors down, recalled hearing a definite door close, followed by footsteps faint enough to be dismissed, and then an oppressive silence. She later told police she sensed something amiss but could not place what until that afternoon. In police interviews, neighbors frequently mentioned brief noises disappearing into stillness. Later that day, around 5 p.m. Lewis returned home. He found the front door unlocked, a detail that should have alerted him. As he walked in, uneasy, he called for Nancy but received no response. He followed a faint dripping sound. The bathroom door stood slightly ajar. Pushing it open, he found her body in the tub. Her clothes were disheveled, torn in parts. The bathtub held water, but the scene looked staged rather than chaotic. Nancy's silk robe was tangled and partially submerged, her hair, damp and clinging to porcelain, and there were signs of assault. No valuables were missing, no signs of forced entry beyond the unlocked door. The bathroom walls and floor were undisturbed. Everything suggested someone intended the appearance of privacy, but under that facade lay violence. Police arrived quickly. Detectives walked through the apartment, cataloging anomalies. The bed showed no sign of struggle. The living room remained untouched. The bathtub, however, was a grim focal point. Investigators remarked how precise and controlled the scene seemed. Something beyond brute force was at play. In the early hours of investigation, authorities considered the possibility of a bungled burglary or personal acquaintance turned violent. The press, already hungry for shock, ran a headline, "Editor Found Slain in Bath." The idea of a distinguished literary woman murdered in her own home was scandalous. Yet the more detectives catalogued the apartment, the less conventional it appeared. Among the few pieces of evidence, a 13-inch length of cord and a single hair discovered on a bedspread. Initially assumed to be Nancy's own, forensic analysis would later reveal that hair came from a horsehair upholstery stuffing, a rare and telling clue. The cord was found lying in close proximity to the bathtub. It appeared new and inconsistent with any fabrics Nancy owned. The fact that nothing else was taken, and the rest of the apartment untouched, led investigators to believe this may not have been a robbery at all. Instead, the crime was more intimate, precise, and premeditated. Public reaction was immediate. In high society circles, whispers spread that perhaps the killer walked in as a repairman, someone Nancy might have trusted. Headlines speculated about inside knowledge, accessory persons, servants, or local tradesmen. Reporters buzzed around the upholstery shop that had delivered goods that morning. Fiorenza and Kruger were questioned early, but at first, their stories seemed plausible. A routine delivery, no reason for suspicion. Still, detectives maintained dozens of leads: neighbors, colleagues, business associates, even personal acquaintances. But the case would hinge on something far smaller than alibis or motive, a minuscule fiber, a stray hair that would turn everything upside down. Detectives had dozens of leads, but one clue, small enough to go unnoticed, would soon expose everything. The apartment was sealed. Detectives swept through Nancy's home with methodical precision, lifting fingerprints from the doorknob, bathtub rim, windowsill, and robe fabric. Neighbors were interviewed. Doormen, deliverymen, porters were all questioned. Every footstep that day was traced in memory. The upholstery men, Kruger and Fiorenza, were under early suspicion simply by virtue of their visit. Most intriguing, however, was the unassuming cord found near the bathtub. Forensic examiners noted it was looped carefully like a tool, not a weapon of opportunity. More astonishing was the discovery on Nancy's robe, fibers unlike any in her wardrobe. Under magnification, the fibers revealed coarse striations consistent not with human hair, but with horsehair upholstery stuffing. This was corroborated later by scientific analysis. Comparisons were made. The fibers did not match any carpet, furniture, or fabrics in the Titterton home. The cord itself appeared fresh, no wear, no fraying from a recent purchase or supplied from outside. Detectives reasoned, this cord and fiber must have been brought in, used, and then discarded with calculation. As the lab work unfolded, the police kept the scene locked down. Only a narrow sliver of clue had emerged, but it glowed in the darkness of uncertainty. In their files was a record: Nancy had ordered upholstery work the previous day. That lead sat dormant until forensic results came back. Detectives re-examined the names of the two upholsterers, Fiorenza Brothers Upholstery, located just blocks away. Fiorenza and Kruger were already known to police as repairmen in that neighborhood. Under discreet surveillance, investigators obtained small samples of materials from the Fiorenza shop: stray horsehair, twine, wires, offcuts. The lab compared these to the fibers from Nancy's robe and the cord from the bathroom. When the match came in, the same breed of horsehair, the same weave of twine, the revelation was electric. Detective logs reveal the moment of confirmation: fiber from Fiorenza workshop matches exactly the rope strand, twine from the same location matches cord used to bind Mrs. Titterton. The link was no coincidence. The delivery men from that morning now shifted from witnesses to suspects. The narrative reversed: their benign visit to install upholstery now became the entry point for murder. With forensic backing, the investigators confronted John Fiorenza, an assistant in the shop, with the evidence. Fiorenza had previously claimed he left early, helping Kruger with other jobs. But in cross-examination, witnesses recalled him loitering after the delivery, making phone calls, wandering the street. His alibi began unspooling. Under hours of relentless questioning, he first denied involvement, insisting he had nothing to fear. But once confronted with fiber and cord matches, and the inconsistency in his statements, he began to crack. He asked to speak with the police commissioner. He requested a cigarette. In hushed tones, he confessed parts of the crime. He admitted entering Nancy's apartment under pretense of upholstery business, then committing sexual assault and strangulation. He claimed he had not initially intended to kill her, that the violence escalated. Fiorenza's confession revealed chilling detail. He'd earlier extracted a cord and horsehair from the shop to use in the crime, planning to smuggle incriminating materials back in. He described tying the silk robe cord, maneuvering Nancy into the bathtub, and trying to compose a scene to resemble an accident. But his staging was flawed. His involvement was intimate, methodical, and revealing. Investigators would later note how few murderers dare to return to the crime central room and linger. Fiorenza had done exactly that, subtly covering tracks until the forensic net closed in. The confession, combined with the forensic evidence and witness inconsistencies, sealed the case. Fiorenza became not just a suspect, but the central figure. He hadn't planned to kill. But his actions after the staging, the deliberate deception, revealed something far darker. By late April 1936, the investigation had run its course. Detectives, armed with a full confession and physical proof, formally arrested John Fiorenza for the murder of Nancy Titterton. The charges were severe: murder and sexual assault. His calm demeanor at the station house unsettled reporters. One described him as quiet, almost polite, as if discussing upholstery orders rather than a killing. He admitted to entering the Titterton apartment under the pretense of completing furniture work. When Nancy allowed him in, he waited for a moment of distraction, then attacked. His explanation was fragmented, a mixture of impulse and calculation. He claimed he panicked afterward, strangled her with a cord from his own supplies, and attempted to make the death look accidental. The confession matched every piece of forensic evidence police had uncovered. During the trial that followed, the prosecution's case was direct and devastating. Forensic analysts held up the horsehair fibers and the length of cord in court. Side by side under magnification, the match was exact. Witnesses testified to Fiorenza's presence that morning, his inconsistent timeline, and his nervous behavior later that day. His employer corroborated that he had unsupervised access to the same materials found in the victim's home. The defense attempted to cast doubt on the confession, suggesting coercion, but the physical evidence spoke louder. Newspapers reported that Fiorenza appeared detached throughout, showing little emotion as prosecutors described Nancy's final moments. The jury deliberated only a few hours before returning their verdict: guilty of first-degree murder. Fiorenza was sentenced to death and transferred to Sing Sing prison in Ossining, New York. There, he awaited execution in the electric chair. On January 22, 1937, less than a year after Nancy's death, the sentence was carried out. Contemporary accounts note that he walked calmly to the chair, again silent, offering no final words. For investigators, the case became a landmark in forensic precision. In an era decades before DNA or digital databases, a microscopic strand of horsehair and a short length of cord had uncovered a killer. Newspapers across the country praised the detectives' attention to trace evidence, calling it a triumph of science over secrecy. The case also struck a cultural chord. To many New Yorkers, Nancy Titterton represented modern womanhood: educated, professional, independent, and her murder felt like an assault on that ideal. The swift resolution, through scientific method rather than speculation, restored a measure of confidence in law enforcement at a time when forensic science was still new. As the headlines faded, the lesson remained: no detail is too small, no fragment too meaningless. From a single thread came justice, and from justice, a warning that truth often hides in what the eye almost overlooks. In an era before DNA, before surveillance, a single strand of horsehair and a simple cord brought a murderer to justice. Can you imagine solving a crime today with evidence that small? Do you think modern technology would have caught him faster, or would he have hidden longer? Nancy's case reminds us that even the smallest details can speak louder than words, and that every clue, no matter how tiny, can change everything. In a city as vast as New York, stories like hers often vanish beneath the noise, but this one didn't. A single thread of horsehair, a length of cord, and the sharp eyes of determined investigators ensured that Nancy Titterton's voice was not lost in silence. Her story became more than a headline. It became a lesson in persistence, in the science of truth before the era of DNA, and in how justice sometimes hangs by the most fragile strands. Even decades later, the case stands as a testament to human intuition, the kind that notices what others overlook. It's a reminder that evil doesn't always arrive with warning signs, and that the pursuit of justice begins with paying attention. As the final echoes of this story fade, we're left with one question: how many crimes remain unsolved simply because no one looked close enough? If you found this story compelling, subscribe and watch out for more.